This is Fiona Cuthbertson coming from the pod to record another episode of Off the Cuff. This week, we're lucky enough to have Tom Harris. Tom is a British journalist and former politician, the ex-MP for Glasgow South for 14 years, and he was a minister in the Department of Transport, for the office of the Secretary of State for Scotland and Advocate General for Scotland. A podcasting legend himself, he hosted the first podcast ever run by an MP and recorded in the Commons called Two Men and a Pod. And he was also ran The Imposter for many years. He was also a founding member of the podcast The Power of Three, which discusses all things Doctor Who. He now regularly writes for The Telegraph and other outlets. And today he's going to talk to us about the chaos within the Labour Party and the political environment in general. So welcome, Tom.
Hi, Fiona. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you very much. So Keir Starmer has resigned. What's your reaction? Was it inevitable, and how did it unravel so quickly from the stonking majority he had commanded?
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I can't think of a precedent to something like this. Yes, it was inevitable. I think I've been saying that for some months. I thought he might have gone before now. There's going to be a lot of books written about this period, and there's going to be a lot of biographies of Starmer, perhaps more than a 2-year premier deserves. But I think there's going to be a lot of interest in not only how he left, but how did someone so ill-suited to politics become leader of a major party and then prime minister? I think that gets to the root of the problem. Essentially, you have a parliament full of politicians. You don't become an MP for especially a marginal seat without working really hard and knowing the ropes and being very, very political down to your fingertips. And yet here was a man who was obviously from the very beginning not a politician. Somebody who went into politics after he finished his main career in law and obviously thought, politics, that looks quite good fun. That looks easy. And he decided to become an MP at the relatively advanced age of 52. And it just shows you the state of the Labour Party back in 2015, that even as a brand new elected MP, Starmer was being asked by various members of the public to stand for the leadership even back then. And I think that's a sign that this was a party without leadership, without a direction, and people were just relieved to have a grown-up in the room. The grown-up being Starmer, because he had proved himself in the legal circles. He had been the director of public prosecutions, and it made a big change from the usual conveyor belt of former spads who then become MPs and become members of the cabinet as of right. And I think Starmer just represented something a bit different from that kind of mindset. But it turned out, and here's the kicker, it turned out that all those spads, the people who do PPE at Oxford and then become a special advisor and then become an MP and then become a member of the cabinet, turns out actually they're quite good at politics. Whereas somebody who's spent his lifetime being a lawyer and not really paying that much attention to the Labour Party isn't actually all that good at it. People just made these assumptions. And I think there was a lot of resentment towards him once he became Prime Minister, because this was a man who thought he could run the whole government through a small coterie of very close advisors, didn't really see the need to get to know any of his MPs, and there were 411 of them after 24. And that bred a lot of resentment. And that's even before we get to the absurd list of U-turns and reversals that he is entirely responsible for. So I think even before we get to his inability to govern and to lead, there were already major systemic structural problems there with his leadership.
And Andy Burnham, the king in the north, as he was, now the MP for Ashton and Makerfield, he's widely tipped as the next leader. So why do you think he's emerged as the favourite now?
This is another astonishing part of this whole soap opera. You'll remember that last September, Andy paid a visit to Labour conference in Liverpool, and it was largely seen as a disaster for him. The tide seemed to have turned against him, and any notion that he could undermine or usurp Keir Starmer. He had overplayed his hand, I think, was the general consensus certainly among journalists and definitely among MPs. And a lot of people thought, well, that's the end of that. That's the Northern Rebellion taken care of. Then suddenly, within an incredibly short space of time, first of all, the Gorton and Denton by-election is called. And Andy isn't even allowed to stand, which was a huge error by Starmer. And we thought, well, that's that then. If there's a vacancy now, Andy's not going to be available. And then we get the Makerfield by-election. And not only is Andy allowed to stand, the party makes sure no other Labour candidate can express even an interest in standing. So Andy is the sole Labour candidate. And then he won it. Now, that's in itself, I mean, I'm cynical when it comes to politics, but that was just a majority of just over 5,000 in a seat where every single ward had been won by Reform just 6 weeks earlier. For Andy to win it and increase Labour's share of the vote, I mean, that's extraordinary. And it was similar, I guess, to Boris Johnson's Conservatives winning Hartlepool in 2021. You know, governing parties don't have swings in their favour in general. But here was a swing in Labour's favour, and Andy cemented his reputation as a politician who could take on Reform. Now, this is what Labour has been desperate for. Reform have been ahead in the polls for more than a year, and nothing that you throw at Nigel Farage seems to stick. Nobody seems to care. Labour were finding it very frustrating. Suddenly presented to them as this guy who seems on paper, and you can look at the figures in Makerfield, it's not just a matter of opinion, it's a matter of record now. Here is somebody who took on Reform and won. Not only won, he actually increased Labour's share of the vote. So that is transformative as far as his political reputation is concerned.
And why do you think nothing will stick to Nigel Farage?
Because I think people, especially the Labour Party, assume that Farage is just another political party leader. It's a huge mistake. He's not. And Reform isn't just another party. Reform is an implement with which unhappy voters can give the establishment a kicking. That's all it is. This idea that you should analyse policies and explain to people why their fiscal policy doesn't add up and why it'd be impractical to do this and that. No one is listening to that. People vote Reform, especially in by-elections, to give the main parties a kicking. That's it. They don't really care about what the policies are or what, although most people tend to care about what happens with immigration, they don't care about the details. What they see is a duopoly of Labour and Conservatives having let down the country in terms of immigration over a long number of years, despite having been told time and time again, especially in working class communities, that this is not something that people want to stand for. And the parties have ridden roughshod over that. Farage and Reform are just a reaction to that. They are anti-establishment. That is it. That's their USP. They're against the Labour and the Conservative Party.
Is it not just a bit dangerous to assume that there will only ever be a reactionary vote, considering we are losing the two-party politics environment in which we've always assumed that the people will automatically go back to the Conservative Party or the Labour Party?
I think the two-party system is pretty much finished. And that makes me very sad. I wish it wasn't, but there we are. And secondly, I think the prospect of a Farage-led government is a very real one. We'll see what effect Burnham has on the situation, but at the moment, I still think it's the most likely outcome of a general election is to have a Farage-led government. But here's the thing, that's not to Farage's credit or even his fault. That's the fault of the political parties, Labour and the Conservatives. All it does is show the main parties that actually you can't continue for years and years ignoring what people are concerned about and thinking that, well, they've nowhere else to go, they have to vote for us. Turns out they have got someone else they can vote for. And I just wish Labour and Conservative politicians would start taking responsibility for that and saying, yeah, we didn't play that very well. We apologise. We're going to do better. But there's no sign that they're going to do that. My view is that in a few years' time, Britain will have a very regressive, hostile, aggressive immigration policy. Now, that will have been introduced either by a Reform-led government, by a Conservative-led government, or by a Labour-led government. But the people have decided that that's what they want. So it's now up to the political parties to decide whether they are the ones to implement it or whether they're going to allow another party to implement it.
Coming back to other policies, Andy Burnham seems to be taking a step to the left. For example, nationalisation of industries like water and energy, wealth taxes. Do you think he'll genuinely move in this direction, or is it just more of a wish list in order to try and get the vote?
I think anyone who answers definitely one way or the other on this is probably not telling you the truth, because the fact is, Andy is a bit of an enigma. Now, when he was a minister under Tony Blair, he was very Blairite. And when he was a minister under Gordon Brown, he was very Brownite. And when he was a shadow minister under Jeremy Corbyn, he was very much a Corbynite. And actually, even though I despised Corbyn, I kind of had a grudging respect for Andy, partly because he is a bit of a political chameleon, and partly because he was so shameless about it and he got away with it. I don't know what his core genuine beliefs actually are. I think there's a huge temptation when you're in his position in the Labour Party to court the members. Now, remember, 2/3 of Labour Party members live in London. And although 50 odd percent of them voted for Keir Starmer in 2020, an awful lot of them voted for Jeremy Corbyn and don't regret it. They only regret that Corbyn failed. These people are still in the Labour Party. So when there was the big coup against Jeremy Corbyn in 2016 in the aftermath of the EU referendum, Andy refused to resign. I think he was Shadow Home Secretary at the time. And he said at the time, I've followed 4 Labour leaders, served under 4 Labour leaders, never organised against any of them. I'm not going to start now, which is a credit to him in a way, I guess. But I remember thinking at the time, that's because you still want to be leader of the Labour Party. And you know that the people, the massive numbers of people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn, might be persuaded to vote for you if you have made a big deal about not leading or taking part in a coup against Jeremy. My view has not changed on that. It's not necessarily completely without principle, but I think it is very cynical. So we don't know, is the bottom line. He doesn't have a lot of money to spend. So I think he will go for the kind of populist policies that he thinks aren't going to cost him that much money in the short term. You know, he may want to nationalise Thames Water, for example, as a single water company rather than nationalise them all. That will leave the government with a massive capital investment programme that they can't afford. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. Is he really going to nationalise the energy companies? I'm not sure what's in it for him in that. I think he'd be far better taking an axe to Ed Miliband's department and doing something on net zero and do something about domestic price of oil and gas, particularly gas. If there is no leadership contest, if he does a Brown, if there's a coronation without any contest, he doesn't need to impress the Labour Party leadership. All he needs to do is impress Labour MPs, some of whom are as mad as the members, but most of whom are reasonably sensible, and he may end up pursuing a middle course. My guess is he's going to disappoint a lot of people because all political leaders do. The question is how he deals with that and how he responds to that.
And of course, Keir Starmer said that if there isn't a leadership election that goes to the members, then he's just going to skedaddle and that's going to be it, which doesn't leave Burnham with an awful lot of time to plan anything out, does it?
It doesn't. I'm against coronations anyway, especially when you're in government, because I think the country deserves more scrutiny of the candidates. Now, in 2007, I also didn't want a coronation of Gordon, but at least he had been Chancellor for 10 years and everyone knew what his policies were. There weren't that many surprises waiting in the wings as far as Gordon's concerned. He'd been pretty much an open book in terms of policy. With Andy, it's different. He spent the last 9 years dealing with buses and planning applications, and that doesn't tell you an awful lot about what his agenda for number 10 would be. So I would prefer to see a debate early between Al Carnes and Andy. We've still got plenty of time to drag in Andrew Neil to interview Andy for an hour, a real grilling, which I think a lot of us would really like to see. I think Andy probably wouldn't like to see that, but I think we deserve that. You know, he could crash and burn in front of Andrew Neil. He will still become Prime Minister. I don't take this view that it's unconstitutional to get rid of an elected Prime Minister. We have never elected a Prime Minister in our history. Prime Ministers are there to do a very restricted job, which is leading the party of government. And Andy can do that certainly as well as Keir did. But at the same time, I think we do need some scrutiny. We need to know who Andy Burnham is. And I think Andy would do himself a lot of favours if he opened up himself to that scrutiny.
And And how do you think the Conservatives are going to capitalise on all this chaos?
Oh, well, isn't it interesting that it just shows you the extent to which the Conservatives really aren't all that relevant to this? They haven't featured much in this drama at all. I mean, they could be following Napoleon's dictum of don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. But then again, I don't think the Labour Party are making a mistake. I think they're correcting an error. Kemi, I think, has improved with almost every appearance at Prime Minister's questions. I think she's got the right instincts. Once again, because Andy's a bit of an unknown quantity, I think it'll be interesting to see how she handles him. It'll take a while, I think. People shouldn't expect there to be fireworks from her at the very first PMQs after Andy takes over. It'll take a little time to get the handle on him. I think Andy will be better at the dispatch box than Keir has been. Keir, because he's not a politician, and he has handled Prime Minister's questions really pretty poorly, especially talking to women, especially insulting them. There was a Welsh Plaid Cymru MP that he had to apologise a week later because he called her stupid or something. I mean, you just don't do that. And if he had any political sense, he would have known not to do that. I think Andy will be more courteous, might be a little bit patronising, but male MPs get away with that all the time. But I think we have to give Kemi a little bit of time to get an idea of how to handle Burnham. I think the Aberdeen South by-election win last week did her a lot of good. I think we can say goodbye for now to letters of no confidence being sent to the chair of the 22. Although, let me take this opportunity to say that whole system is just bonkers, and why the Conservative Party still have it, I have no idea. They're mad, but there we are.
Starmer's resignation, disaster or deliverance?
Deliverance. He is the worst Prime Minister of my lifetime. And I include Liz Truss in that. Because Liz at least gets points for being a politician and knowing what she wanted to do with that office. She screwed it up. She was not competent. But having a non-politician in that position was offensive, frankly. He was robotic. He couldn't emote with anyone. He resorted to his standard cliches about country before party. It was almost as repetitious as telling us what occupation his father had. It was nonsense. It was performative, and it was a very bad performance. And I'm sorry, I have no reason to doubt that he's a nice guy. But there are literally millions of nice guys in this country. And none of them think they've got the right to be Prime Minister. So why does he think he has? I'm sorry, he was utterly useless. And I think whatever kind of Prime Minister Andy Burnham is going to be, he's going to be an improvement on Keir Starmer. Now, that doesn't mean he'll be more popular. It doesn't mean that he won't be leading the Labour Party into a disastrous general election in 3 years' time. I don't know. But I know he'll be better than Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Tom, for giving us your insight and thoughts on what's proving to be a most interesting time in UK politics. Thank you to the viewers who've hopefully enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed making it. If you have any questions regarding the podcast, please feel free to comment, like and subscribe. Please, the more the merrier. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Hope you have a good week, one and all.